Hello, how are you? I'm Cristina Romero, and with Maria Rosa de la Iglesia, I am part of RC Arquitectura. We would first of all like to thank the organizers of the conference for organizing this atypical meeting because it has caught us all unaware. And I'm sure that they have made a huge effort for this to be a success. And we would also like to greet all our colleagues because the PEB conference is a meeting point, and it's wonderful to talk to your colleagues in the corridors and have a drink. After the meetings. So this year it's not going to be possible, so we're greeting you from here. Our paper is called The Three Bs in Spanish, good, nice, and cheap, and we're going to cover these during our presentation. Our studio work focuses mainly on single-family homes with projects that we've developed and designed from scratch, but we also help other colleagues to improve their design projects and making them passive house. And sometimes we receive projects that are in an advanced stage of execution, and the developers want to certify them as passive house projects. But there are also some starting conditions that are important to take into account, particularly when we're talking about single family homes, because they are probably the most difficult to get certification because they have a small surface area compared to other buildings. So these conditioning factors could be that there is too much vegetation in the area with deciduous species. Sometimes the plots are too narrow, long, and lots of corners that makes the positioning very difficult, or initial decisions of the projects that make the factor form not be very good, or that there are too many windows or too much glazing in awkward orientations. Of course, all of this leads us to have a very clear picture about what has to be done, because we've been working for 10 years with this type of building, and there are factors that have to be taken into account from the initial stages, like compactness, form factor, orientation, and windows or glazing. And not only should to ensure that we're going to obtain certification, but also to reduce extra costs of a passive home in single-family homes if you don't take these issues into account. In our case, in our paper, what we're going to do is study these three factors: compactness of form factor, the orientation of glazings, and the amount of glazing. And we're always going to study it in two types of buildings, not to compare them, but to study two different cases and have they have an impact on these factors. And each of one of them, we're going to see the starting point and the change in the design. Sometimes we're going to worsen the initial situation, and the second one to see the important building effort that has to be done when you don't start with passive house design factors from the beginning. This is the first factor that we're going to study, which is the form factor. We start with the case one. Case one is a semi-detached home in Aranjuez, and it has a good form factor, it's a compact building, and the second case is a detached one. And as you can see, it is elongated and it has a bad form factor, which makes it difficult for the design decisions that were taken afterwards. If we analyze the building in Aranjuez, you will see the figures for the PHPP. I've told you it's in Aranjuez, though it says Toledo here, because Aranjuez is closer to Toledo than Madrid. But we've chosen Toledo. We've included the height, the energy reference surface, 247 square meters, and it is in the process of certification. It needs a heating of 12 kilowatts square meter year, and for cooling 8 kilowatts hour square meter year. So its form factor is 2.1, so it's compact. You can also see here the transmitters values of the different elements of the construction. It's got 0.191 for the facade, 0.248 for walls, 0.176 for roofs, and 0.313 for floors, and for windows, 1.160. So what have we done? We've worsened the situation. And if we had applied the value of the form factor of 0.5, we would have a form factor of 3.1. So look at the transmittance values. Look what happens. They become far more demanding. And what does this tell us? Well, that we're going to have to improve the conductivity of the elements or increase the width of the insulation, or maybe do both. So if we study the second case, which is the detached home in Galapagar, you can see that it's in Madrid with that climate. The reference energy surface area is 155 square meters. Heating demand is 13 kilowatts hour square meter a year, whereas for cooling it's 5, and the form factor is 4.7, so it's not a very compact building. But if we improve this value and we move it down to 3.2, look how the transmittance changes in facades, walls, roofs, and floors. It allows us to have insulations that are type 2. If we move to talking about whether it's nice or not, I'm not going to judge what is nice and which is less nice. What we want to say is that passive house tries to be applied to different designs, and you don't always work with closed homes or blocks, and we have two different types of homes that require certification. One of them is in a city, so the house looks within, and the other one is in the countryside, in the mountains, so it's open towards the outside. If we're going to talk about whether it's cheap or not, what is the result of what we were talking about? Well, worsening the form factor in case 1, going from 2.1 to 3.1, means that you have to increase the insulation of the facade up to 10 centimeters and the walls that are in contact with the floor to more than 8 and the roofs 15. And worsening the form factor can cost 11,000 euros more, 44 euros per square meter, always keeping the initial energy demand stable. And I'd like to say that when we're talking about prices, we've used the online database of the CYPE, and we've only taken into account the insulation, which was essential for us. The insulation of all the examples we've shown you are EPS in walls that are in touch with the wall and facades, and we've also used XPS panels for all cases so that a comparative study could be carried out. Case 2, that's a detached home in Galapagar, has an improved form factor going from 4.7 to 3.2, so the insulation of the facade could go down to 7 centimeters, the walls in touch with the ground 5 centimeters, and roofs 8 centimeters. So in this case, we would be saving 4,000 euros or 26 euros per square meter of SER, maintaining the initial energy demands. With respect to good, we're talking about the second case, which is window orientation. And we're going to compare two examples. Case 1 is the same one as we saw before, a semi-detached home in Aranjuez, and in case 2, a semi-detached home in Valdemoro. Why have we chosen these two cases? Because they have the particularity that they are attached on the southern side, so there will be no windows with a southern orientation. They'll all have north orientation. If we study the case 1, which have the same figures as we had before, and we're going to focus on the window surface. In case 1, you have 44.59 square meters of windows. 53% to the north, 26% to the east, 0% south, because as we said, that is where the building is attached, and 21% west. These are the transmittance values: 0.19, 0.24 for walls, 0.17 for roofs, 0.31 for floors, and 1.16 for windows. And if we switched the building 180 degrees and the northern facade became the southeast-west and west-east, what would happen with transmittance? Well, we can see the result below. We've changed the percentages here. South, that was north, and as you've seen, we've changed them all. The transmittance values would vary very much. So in facade, we would go from 0, which is a significant change. And if we analyze it in the second case, let's start here. The energy reference surface is the same. Demand for heating is 15 kilowatts hour square meter a year, and cooling 9 kilowatts, and form factor 3.3. And to make sure that we're going to have these values, this home has 58% of its windows overlooking north, 3% east, 4% south, and 35% west, because there is a little window overlooking a yard. And these are the transmittance values. If we did the same thing and turned it around 180 degrees, look how transmittance values change. So we have a significant change happening. And if we talk about nice, well, it's easier to compare, but we're talking about urban plots. One of them is more open, one is closed, one is in a corner, but you yourselves can do the comparison study. And let's talk about cheap. Well, to have a better window orientation, as we've seen in case 2, where we've changed the orientation, would entail changing the width of the facade in up to 8 centimeters, with the walls touching the floor in 4 and of the floor in 10. And the better window orientation would mean saving 4,000 euros or 18 euros per square meter of the energy reference surface, always keeping the original energy values or demands. In case 2, a better orientation would reduce the width up to 9 centimeters of the facades, or walls in contact with the soil in 16, and roofs in 15, and floor 10, with a saving of nearly 11,000 euros. And it's important to see that the savings here are different. It's nearly 11,000. But what's important about these buildings is that in case 1, we have 45 square meters of windows, whereas in case 2, you have 25 square meters more, nearly 70. So this is linked very closely to the next item, which is the amount of windows. In this last item, we're going to pair a detached home in Moraleja de Medio and another one, semi-detached one in Madrid. We have different designs and different amounts of windows. In Moraleja de Medio is in Madrid, surface energy area of 262 square meters and form factor 3, windows 45.10 square meters, which gives us an amount of windows for the energy reference surface of 0.18. Heating demand 12 kilowatts and cooling 4. And if we change it, if we go down to 90.20 square meters, and the heating demand practically doesn't change. In our climate, this means that you have more or less windows in summer is not significant. You compensate the losses per year, or with the gains that you may have. But look what happens. We go from 4 kilowatts hour to 7 kilowatts hour when it comes to the needs for cooling. In the second case, what we did was divide the windows by half. 73.96, originally to 36.98. A heating demand of 14 and for cooling also 14. If those windows were divided into two, or we reduced the surface of windows to half, heating demands would be more or less the same, but for cooling would change and would be less than half. When we talk about nice, these are the two examples. I'm not going to show you a 3D picture. You're going to have to assess it from a geometrical standpoint, but I'm also showing it to you so that you can see what the buildings are like. And when we talk about cheap, the conclusions that we reach is to double the number of windows. In this particular case is vital when it comes to cooling demand in our climate. It is absolutely essential to take into account the amount, size and orientation of windows, because you're going to have to protect them. You need solar protection. For economic calculation, we've used basic values, like an awning, which is the cheapest element that you can use, will mean an extra cost of 6,000 euros or 23 euros per square meter in case one, and in case two, it would be exactly the same. If you don't take this into account, the amount of size and orientation of windows is going to have an impact. In case two is 6,000 euros of extra cost or 36 euros per square meter. So let's talk about the conclusions. I think it is quite clear that what we have seen throughout the past few years, that you have to take into account from the beginning zero cost factors like compactness, orientation, amount of windows, because it's critical when it comes to the final cost if you want to obtain a passive house certification. If you don't study it correctly, you will have extra costs. And in the cases that we've studied, we're talking of up to 50 euros per square meter. Extra costs that are not due to the fact that the building will be certified as passive house, because it can be sold. And in our experience, the extra cost of certified passive house could be zero, compared to a building that abides by the technical codes if you are careful with the initial design, or if you don't take into account these factors. To conclude, let's go back to the first picture, where you can see a series of models of buildings that are undergoing a certification process, because our conclusion is that the good thing is to design low-cost passive house, because it improves the quality of construction and comfort of the buildings. And when you talk about something nice, it depends on what you like, and cheap would mean that it does not entail extra costs, and the amount of windows, compactness and the form factor play a very important role in this. Thank you very much for your attention.